Our epistle readings this morning come from Paul's first and second letters to a young colleague in Ephesus named Timothy. Now, I'm going to read you 1 Timothy 5 and 2 Timothy first chapter, verse 5. And then I'm going to read you something from 1 Timothy chapter 3, which I'm going to ask you to take with a large grain of salt. So, first, 1 Timothy 5. Listen now as if Paul were writing to you because he was. Now, if any of the faithful has relatives who are widows, let them assist them. Let the church not be unburdened, so that it can assist those who are real widows. And whoever does not provide for relatives, and especially for family members, has denied the faith. Now, the second reading from 2 Timothy is, I am reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that lived first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice, and now I am sure lives in you. And here is this reading from 1 Timothy chapter 3. The saying is sure, whoever aspires to the office of bishop desires a noble task. A bishop must be above reproach, married only once, temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, and apt, teacher, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, and not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, keeping his children submissive and respectful in every way. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? Here end the readings. Will you pray with me? God of all our relationships, I ask that these words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing in your sight, but also transformative in our lives, that we might better serve you and your vision of love in this world. Amen. The 2016 film Bad Moms contains a scene where one mother has a fantasy that she is sharing with another. She says, sometimes when I'm driving all by myself, I have this fantasy that I get into a car crash. Not a big one, no fire, no explosions, but just like a little one. But I do get injured, and I get to go to the hospital for 2 weeks, and I sleep all day, and I eat Jell-O, and I watch so much TV, and it's all covered by my insurance. My kids bring me balloons, and the nurses rub cream on my feet, and oh my God, it's so amazing. Is that like something you guys fantasize about too? They respond, no, and I'm never going to get in a car with you. Now here's what I know about most of us as parents. For the most part, you carry a lot of guilt. You hold yourself to an impossible standard, particularly for those of you whose children are still at home. I have heard you worrying that you yelled too much, were too strict with the kids, agonizing over this time or that when you threw something or said something or did something that wasn't exactly right. Or I hear you lamenting that you aren't there enough, don't know what to do about such and such a problem. You wonder why they don't listen or what you've done wrong. And here's what I know about us as children. You wonder one of two things. How could they have done it all wrong? Or, how did they manage to juggle it all and be such perfect parents at the same time? Which just makes you even wonder more what you're doing wrong. But here's the thing. If there's one thing that the Bible has to teach us about our family relationships, it is this. You can stop feeling so bad about yours. First, there was Cain and Abel. Now, if you aren't familiar with their story, it involved jealousy and fratricide. Then there's Abraham, considered the patriarch of 3 of the world's largest religions, Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And there's him and his wife Sarah. Now, you might know this story. They couldn't have children, they thought, so Sarah did what was common at the time. She offered her servant woman to Abraham to have children that she would then claim as her own. Now, this was okay for a little while, at least for Abraham and Sarah, probably not for Hagar, the servant woman. But then Sarah became pregnant. And suddenly she was not so keen on Hagar and Ishmael hanging around. And she forced Abraham to send them away, which meant out into the desert, no food, no money, no water, definitely no alimony or child support. Now Ishmael goes on to become the founder of the Muslim faith, and Isaac, Sarah's son, the Christian faith. And we wonder why we can't all just get along. It's written into our foundational story. Or perhaps you know the story of Joseph. And if you don't, you might be familiar with the Broadway production about his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But Joseph was his father Jacob's favorite son, his favorite out of 12. Now, if you ever wondered whether you were the favorite, Joseph's family, they didn't have to wonder. They all knew it was him. And they all hated him so much for it that they sold him into slavery, which was actually the better option because they had intended to kill him. They were, of course, just repeating a pattern in their own family of origin, because Joseph and his brothers were great-grandchildren of Abraham, and Abraham's son Isaac and his wife Rebekah had 2 sons, and they played favorites too, just like Abraham had. Isaac loved one son, Rebekah the other, and Rebekah schemed with Jacob, her favorite, to trick her husband into giving his fatherly blessing and all the property that entailed to her favorite son, and not the eldest. Now, Jacob, the younger son, also got tricked into marrying the sister of the woman that he wanted to marry, so eventually he ends up married to both, and I can only imagine what that looked like at family Thanksgiving. Now, of course, they also got into the game of baby races to win Jacob's affection, adding the children of their servants to the mix, just as their grandmother-in-law had done before them. Which brings us, of course, back to Joseph and the whole slavery is better than death thing, and we are skipping right over the part where Noah becomes a drunkard post-flood and wanders around naked all the time being mocked by his children. So, one of the most important things our biblical stories have to teach us is that our family systems repeat themselves. Generations upon generations in a row. This means that if your grandfather was cut off, or cut themselves off from their siblings, it would be really wise to think about whether you have the same tendencies to remove yourself from situations you find too difficult. Have you had relationships that just ended? Either catastrophically or quietly, but either way with a finality that you can't quite understand. Or perhaps your parents fought, and you aren't quite sure why you can't stop bickering with your spouse. Maybe your grandmother was an alcoholic, and your grandfather spent his life enmeshed with hers, taking care of her, hiding it, doing everything around the house so folks wouldn't notice. And perhaps you find yourself doing the same for your spouse, who is depressed or a workaholic. Anyone who tells you that the Bible says the best family system is a man and a woman and 2.5 kids and a picket fence, they are straight up lying. There are sections, of course, that tell you this is the way families should be, but those rules only get written down because they are needed. Because as a general rule, they get broken, which makes the rules that are laid down even more interesting. Now, what you'll notice about biblical rules is that there are very few rules about how parents should treat their children. Some of this is related to the ways in which children were viewed. They were actually the lowest rung on the social totem pole. They were lower even than the slaves. But I also think it has something to do with the innate structure of the human experience. Now I'm going to remind us again of the central premise of this sermon series. Now, the inspiration is from Martin Buber's classic work, I Am Thou, in which he explains that the way we have to interact with the world is relationship. That's it. There is no other way. We can either be a person interacting with another person who has independent wishes and needs and interests, what he calls a thou, or we can be a person interacting with a thing, mostly in order to serve our own needs, what he calls an it. And most of the time, we interact with the world and other people like they are its. Most interactions are there to serve a purpose for us. What can you do for me? And when are you going to do it? Now that is okay, necessary even. It is really hard to live in the experiential all the time. We are the centers of our universe since we are born. When we cry in the middle of the night, our needs are met. That is the pattern into which we are all born. Our parents come when we call or we die. Later in life, we scrape our knees and they come. They shelter us, feed us, and in most cases, comfort us. Now, of course, there are always exceptions to this. And I know that there are people in this room who were abused or abandoned or hurt or betrayed, whose parents have long since gone either emotionally or physically. And I am trusting you all here today that you will hear generously and understand that in our variety of experiences, there will be exceptions to what I say and parts that just might not apply to you. Take the parts that do. Because our highest calling is to relationships that are I-thou. This is what the scriptures are meant to guide us toward. Relationships and interactions that are based not on what you can do for me, but meeting you where you are, as who you are, and valuing you for who you are and what I can do for you. That includes our families, and especially our parents. And according to the Bible, mostly regardless of how you feel you've been treated, except in cases of abuse. Now, I'm pretty sure that most of you didn't have siblings who were sold into slavery because of how daddy treated you. Now, there might be one or two of you, of course, but still. Now, the commandments are pretty clear. Honor thy father and mother. Think of the 10 commandments. The first of them are all having to do with our relationship with God. The last half have all to do with our relationships with one another. And before, do not kill, or steal, or lie, or covet, or cheat. You have honor thy father and mother. Because as family relationships go, that relationship is often the hardest to overcome. And yet it is the most essential to our own and our parents' own development as God's beloved children. You see, the Hebrew Bible and the world in which it emerged, it had a large social security net. Farmers weren't allowed to harvest the entirety of their fields. Anything that left on the ground, that had to be left for those who were hungry and destitute. Temple offerings were used to feed each other. But in terms of housing and a status in social society, family was responsible for one another. It was family. Parents raised children, and children took care of parents. As the book of Proverbs says, train children the right way, and when they are old, they will not stray. Now, if your children didn't make that transition to understanding their obligation to you, at that time, you would die, like an infant. The early church, in fact, was so worried about caring for its elders and widows that Paul wrote in his letter to Timothy, hey, take care of your family first, so we can know who is really without any family to care for them. Now, if you are wondering about siblings, perhaps you've noticed that most of what the Bible has to say about siblings is just there to make you realize how good you've got it. If you think the New Testament is any better, you are sorely mistaken. Think about Mary, his own mother. Jesus' own mother is unwed and a teenager, and it doesn't seem that Joseph gets all that much credit for stepping in as an adoptive dad. But think about the time when he was 12, and he doesn't join the caravan home post-Passover. Instead, he decides to stay in Jerusalem at the temple. Now, if you think Mary didn't chew him out when she found him, or berate herself for not noticing that he wasn't there, you are kidding yourself. But just think, if someone was sitting on the chair in my office, can't you just hear it? My mother just left me there. They just forgot me. The trauma. When he was older and they were at the wedding of a family friend, it was Mary who looked at Jesus, her 30-year-old adult unmarried son, and said, "Okay, it's time. You've got to do your thing now." Now, the family had run out of wine and social suicide was really approaching for that family, but Jesus, in a classically childish way, returns back to her, "Woman, what has that got to do with me?" And then he went and followed her directions. Later, during his ministry, someone approaches Jesus to say, "Blessed is the womb who bore you." And instead of saying, "Yeah, my mom is pretty great," he says, "Blessed is the one who hears the word of God with an open heart." Thanks, Jesus. But true to the biblical model, as he is stretched out on the arms of the cross, with one of his very last breaths, he looks at his mother below him, and the disciple whom he loved standing by, and said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Marriage and friendships, those are the people we choose to take responsibility for, but families, those are the ones God gives to us free of charge. Yours to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, till death do you part, and long after. This is the family system of the Bible, God's social security plan, as it is called by the Reverend Adam Hamilton, which is good because, as he notes, Medicare and Social Security are currently going to be exhausted in 2035, long before many of our careers will end. Parents, you better train your children right now, in the hilarious words of Proverbs. But seriously, that is the family system of the Bible. In the words of Murray Bowen, author and creator of family systems theory, you have inherited a lifetime of tribulation. Everybody has inherited a lifetime of tribulation. Take it over, make the most of it, and when you have decided you know the right way, do the very best you can with it. You have inherited a lifetime of tribulation. Everybody has. The Bible's best advice is, and here I am treating lightly, it's serious advice, to get over it, to recognize it, and to transcend it. Now, a while back, somebody approached me about their upcoming trip to visit an aging mother who had just received a very poor health diagnosis, and he concluded that what he could offer in this very difficult situation was some levity, because that was the role he had always played in the family. But the conversation actually had started with a lament that his relationship wasn't as strong as he would like. His mother was stubborn, he said, and wanted things done her way, and their relationship was a light one and superficial. A pattern I could not help but note that would be well and truly repeated, cemented even, in his pledge to bring levity to his upcoming visit. The point of recognizing our patterns is precisely so we can transcend them, not repeat them. If you want better relationships with your families, you know the way. It is the same as the others we have talked about. It involves time and patience. It involves vulnerability and forgiveness. It involves a repeated effort to understand that the other person is not in orbit around you. A thou whose needs in fact supersede your own, particularly with our parents and our siblings. Now, the Reverend Hamilton, on whose sermon series this is based, he actually ended his sermon with a clip of the hit TV show Gilmore Girls. Now, for those of you who don't know it, the show revolves around Lorelai, a woman in her 30s and 40s, and her daughter, her teenage daughter Rory, and her mother, Emily. Now, in the particular clip that he showed, Emily's mother-in-law, Lorelai's grandmother, is about to come to town for a visit. Now, I thought about leaving this part out, but it turns out that my mother surprised me with a visit yesterday for my installation. So I decided we were going to do a special guest appearance reenactment of this clip. picture Lorelai and her mother in her living room in a sweet little New England town. Oh, right, I was, yes. This makes it more believable. Hang on. It's hard to take me seriously or lightly with that thing on. All right, here we go.
This couch cannot stay.
Yes, it can.
It's awful.
It can hear you.
Oh, please.
No.
Well, what about the chair? Let me move the chair.
No, the chair stays also.
Well, we have to do something. I brought flowers over and can't find a decent vase. All I could find was a ceramic Betty Boop head.
Mom, you're making yourself crazy.
I know. We'll get some tarps and throw them over everything, and we'll just tell her that you're painting.
Mom, stop it. What is so horrible about this room?
Well, look at it.
I am. It's my living room. I like it.
Well, you might like it, but your grandmother will not. She's going to take one look around at the junk store collection of hobo furniture, and she's going to blame me.
For what?
For letting you live like this, for not teaching you better, for not redecorating when you are out of town.
Well, we are never out of town,
For
so...
not sending you out of town so I could redecorate.
Mom, you don't actually believe that.
Everything that's wrong in your life is my fault. Everything that's wrong in your father's life is my fault. Basically, everything that's wrong is my fault.
Mom, just sit down for a minute.
And it's lumpy. Perfect.
Mom, if I may, I would like to give you some advice.
You would?
You need to develop a defense mechanism for dealing with Grandma.
What are you talking about?
You need a system, a new mindset. Take me, for example.
What about you?
Well, I know there are many things in my life that you don't approve of.
Well, like what?
This couch?
Well, this couch is terrible.
Okay, good. You think the couch is terrible. Now, at one point in my life, you saying that a couch that I carefully picked out and had to pay off over 8 months is terrible might have hurt my feelings, but not anymore.
No.
No,
Why not?
because one day I decided that instead of being hurt and upset by your disapproval, I'm going to be amused. I'm going to find it funny. I'm even going to take a little bit of pleasure in it.
You take pleasure in my disapproval?
I encourage it sometimes for a laugh.
I don't know what to think of that.
Think, hey, that's brilliant, because this idea could set you free. Mom, what are you thinking about?
That ridiculous Betty Boop head.
So am I. End scene. Now, it is a pretty brilliant idea, you know. Our parents are or were their own people with their own idiosyncrasies, their fears, anxieties, and needs, and the only thing we can control in any of these relationships is our own reaction, which in most cases is usually enough. So you might as well laugh.